Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be able to share this time again with you. Today, my presentation is entitled Wu Wei, and that, of course, is day 22 of the Tao of Joy Every Day. And the subtitle for this presentation I've chosen is Unattached Action, which, if you ever heard Derek speak on Wu Wei, you know that that's really what Wu Wei is. It's unattached action. And I'm going to basically repeat things that I've learned from Derek over the years about Wu Wei. And hopefully, I probably can't do it as skillfully as he does, but I will give it my best shot. So I want to start with a definition of Wu Wei, because in the chapter in the Tao of Joy Every Day, that's how Derek starts, and he breaks it down. Wu means not having, and Wei means action or purpose. And so with those definitions, often it's superficially translated as non-action. However, the authentic Tao concept of Wu Wei is much deeper than that oversimplification. And I bring this up because there tends to be, I've noticed, in the West, a misunderstanding about the teaching of Wu Wei. Somehow it's melded into, some people think it's doing nothing. And that's just not correct. It's an oversimplification. It doesn't go into the deep meaning. So I'm going to try to unpack the deep meaning a little bit today. So I want to talk about the misconception of Wu Wei in the West first, a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to talk about someone I've talked about before, and that's a gentleman named Jacob Bernowski. I think I brought him up in my presentation on tools. I specifically talked about The Ascent of Man, which is a program he made in the late 60s that was aired in the early 70s. And it may seem odd that I'm bringing up Bernowski here to talk about Wu Wei, but there is a reason, and I will explain. So Jacob Bernowski, of course, was a scientist, a mathematician, and a poet. He lived from 1908 to 1974. He was really one of the world's last great polymaths. I think the world today is so specialized that you don't see a lot of polymaths anymore. But he certainly was one for his time. An interview between Bernowski and Michael Parkinson that aired in 1974 on the BBC has something in it that reminds me of this misconception about Wu Wei. So that's why I'm bringing this up. At one point in the interview, Parkinson asked Bernowski about how he balances being a scientist and a poet. And Bernowski talks about it a bit. And the whole interview is interesting, not just this part of it, but a lot of it. And one of the things that Bernowski says is he talks about how people wanting the promise, there are people who want the promised land without having to work for it. And everything he sort of says in that bit, it's just a few minutes toward the beginning of the interview, reminds me so much of the misconception that we encounter in the West that Wu Wei is doing nothing. And if you've never seen the interview, it's available on YouTube, but I encourage you to seek it out because it's an hour that will be wonderfully well spent. I think people in this meeting would certainly enjoy it. But basically, when Bernowski answers Michael Parkinson's question, he asks him, hey, do you still write poetry even now? And he says, yes, I do, but he writes a poem once every Christmas and he sends it out to his friends. And then Parkinson asks him for an example, and Bernowski says, well, I'll give you one from a few years ago. And he shares this poem during the interview, one of his poems that probably, I don't know whether it's published or not. I don't think it is. I think it's just something he shared with his friends. But whenever I encounter people misunderstanding the concept of Wu Wei, I always think of this poem. So I wanted to share it with you. And this is how it goes. This is the coast the lemmings reached, They did not drown, but simply beached. Here, after agonies and less, they found the go-go star, success, the goddess in the wilderness, who shook her breast and blessed the west. She beckoned from the burning glass, Medusa with a face of brass, and with her sunset fingertip, wrote as if in magnesium strip, a rain check on the Hall of Fame. Make a cross and put your name. I always think of this poem when I encounter people saying, hey, you know what, the best thing is to do nothing, everything's meaningless, don't do anything, let things unfold, don't touch it, don't take action. But what Farouqi points out is that when he came to California, a lot of people had come to California thinking of California as this great El Dorado, and they wanted to have all the success. And he talked about how you can achieve everything in the pause except for the desire to win. And of course, you know, in Eastern philosophy, and Taoism specifically, right, the dangers of desire have been well expounded upon, right? We've all heard that, and of course there's a certain truth to it, to be sure. Desire is something you have to be careful of. But what I want to point out is that desire is neither good nor bad, and maybe as its opposite, I've chosen indifference. There's probably a few different ones I could have chosen, but I went with indifference. Indifference in itself isn't good or bad, but the Tao is about obtaining balance. That's really what the Tao is about, and certainly, to me, Wu Wei is like the perfect balance. And so, to illustrate that, I've come up with this slide. Now, I want to this slide that I have up here, where I have desire on the left and indifference on the right, and then I've sort of broken the yin-yang single apart, and in the middle, I put attached action to represent that balanced center path. I sort of got this idea of this balanced center path from Chris. When I first went to the temple, Chris was one of the people who, you know, mentored me and taught me some things. And I remember one day he was sort of teaching me about balance, and he put up the yin yang symbol, and he drew sort of a reference on a blackboard at the temple of sort of a middle path between the two. Now, he wasn't specifically talking about Wu Wei or desire or indifference, but he was pointing out that the Tao is about the balanced path. And I was new to the Tao and didn't know much, and Chris was kind enough to share his insights with me. And, you know, that's been several years now, and I thanks to him making that illustration, because I am sort of a visual learner. It really helped me to sort of understand that idea of the Tao is about the balance between the two energies. So, so Wu Wei is basically that center path, and the way to achieve that ability to take unattached action at the right time, and to take, number one, the right action and at the right time, because that's really what unattached action is. That's what Wu Wei is. It's taking the correct action at the correct time in a non-obtrusive way, a gentle, soft touch, so to speak, which Derek so wonderfully explains in the Tao of Joy Every Day. But the first step, when you're, you know, beginning, or even if you're further along on the path, and you want to sort of master this idea of Wu Wei, the best thing we can all start with, and we all need a reminder from time to time, is the importance of mindful awareness. Because that really is the first step, because you have to know what's going on to know what action is appropriate and what kind of action. And so I want to talk about mindful awareness a little bit. What is mindful awareness? Well, essentially it's knowing exactly where we are in space and time at all times. It's knowing exactly what we're doing in the present moment. You know, no matter how mundane or complex the task is, it's good to be present in the moment. Even with mundane tasks, I found that it's much better to be present. And of course, it's knowing exactly what we just did, right? Knowing, and also too, I didn't put this in, but it's also knowing what you're going to do next. But in a sense, it is it's a flow, right? Knowing what we just did, knowing what we're doing at the present moment, knowing what the next step is in cases where there are a next step. And if you can master this, you're on your way to achieving Wu Wei. No pun intended with that rhyme. Okay, so there we go. So what's the opposite of this? Well, very simply, it's not knowing exactly where we are in space and time, not knowing exactly what we're doing in the present moment, not knowing exactly what we just did. Now, it seems so simple. It's like, how could we not know? But if you think about it, we do this a lot. I'll bet we all do it. I know I do it. So to remind myself of when I catch myself being unaware, I always think of Otto from the autopilot from the movie Airplane. If you've never seen the movie Airplane, just take my word for it. It's probably the funniest movie ever made, and you'll either agree with me on that point or you'll be like Wendy and think that I'm crazy. But it's okay that she thinks I'm crazy because she loves me, and I love her, and I think she's crazy too. So I'm kidding, of course. So I think of Otto from Airplane when I catch myself being unaware, and essentially, think about the ways this happens. Have you ever driven to work and arrived at work, and then you stop and think about, wait, I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember the lights that I stopped at. I don't remember turning. All I know is I suddenly became aware that I had arrived at work and was not present for the drive. Well, that's happened to me. I'm going to venture out a guess that that's happened to other people as well. Or if you've ever you can't remember where you just put something a second ago. If you've ever had that happen. I'm sure you know that. If you've ever been watching a program possibly, and then somehow in the space between the commercial and going back to the program, you can't remember what you were watching, right? Those are all signs that we're on autopilot. And you'll be surprised when you start to try to pay attention to it, that when you consciously try to catch yourself doing it, you'll find that a lot of people, including yourself most likely, engage in this autopilot without realizing it. And knowing that there's a problem is the first step to addressing it. And I have a long way to go, but I'm better at it than I used to be, just from the fact that I've learned from Derek to be more cognizant of it, more aware of it. So it's important to gauge your own level of awareness. It's helpful. It's the first step, really, to knowing what the appropriate action is and if it's the appropriate time to take that gentle, unobtrusive action. Okay, so just looking at the time here, I know we're on a short schedule, so I want to start to sum it up. Because Wu Wei is often translated as non-action, a misconception has developed in the West that Wu Wei is about doing nothing, and that's not the Tao. That's not true. That's not the authentic Tao to say that Wu Wei is about doing nothing. Not at all. As Jacob Bernowski's interview with Michael Parkinson and his poem points out, doing nothing will take away your desire to do what is good and correct. Although Taoism specifically talks about the pitfalls of desire, it is important to remember that the Tao is always about achieving a dynamic balance, and the balance between desire and indifference is unattached action. Wu Wei should not be reduced to doing nothing. It is much more subtle than such an oversimplification. Wu Wei is a state of being that enables you to take the right action at the right time in a gentle, non-overbearing way. The first step to mastering the Tao Te Ching of Wu Wei is to develop our situational and mindful awareness in everything we do in life, from the complex to the mundane. And just as a side here, if you're wondering what's the difference between situational and mindful awareness, this is how I think of it. Police officers and firefighters are trained to be situationally aware. And if you think about it, this is a wonderful analogy to Wu Wei, because they have to go into situations, right? Those are the people we call, let's face it, when the biological material hits the fan, right? Those are the people we call. And they come and they have to bring a calmness and an awareness to that situation in order to help us. Whether that's a firefighter who has to know where in that burning building he is, where he should go to rescue who, what he has to do, what action is appropriate, he has to be aware to do that. And it's the same thing with the police officer. He has to be situationally aware. And mindful awareness is all of that. I think of situational awareness as an external thing, and mindful awareness as also including external things, but having a slightly deeper level in that mindfulness of your internal landscape as well. And that is something that's also helpful to have and can be cultivated with, the things that Derek and Bill and Ed have shared with us about meditation and taking time aside to focus on spiritual matters so that we don't end up in a spiritual void. So, so there it was. There's a presentation. As always, I want to end with a book recommendation, The Tao of Joy Every, a great book to use daily to help one study and learn the Tao teachings and put them into action. Thank you all for listening to what I had to say today. I hope I said something that was of use, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.
Alex, thank you so much for that talk. It definitely resonates with me, especially as it's a reminder for me that I need to practice my mindful awareness. I see the result of that lack of awareness on a daily basis. That is, when I drive to work and I park my car and then I start walking toward the entrance to the building, and 20 feet away from the car, I'm thinking, did I lock the car? Oh, I have no recollection of locking the car. So I find myself walking back, checking the door. Okay, I locked it. All right. So that, to my mind, is a definite sign that I was like daydreaming, sleepwalking, just going through the motions without realizing what I was doing. So on a day like that, on a scale from 1 to 10, I would actually rate myself, like a 1. I was not aware. I have to go back. So a scale, on that same scale, if I were to, close the door of the car and then check it right away, would that be a 10? Well, in my mind, it actually wouldn't. I think that a 10 would be that when I lock the car, I know that's exactly what I'm doing. So when I shut the door, I don't even need to check. I'll just walk toward the building. That's being mindful every instance, every moment. So I wanted to share that with everyone as sort of a confessional that I too lack mindful awareness.